Good evening. Thank you all for joining our fourth session in the Spring 2021 Innovate Lecture Series. For those who are joining us today for the first time, the purpose of this series is to discuss the role of big data in the field of image-guided therapy and the integration of AI along with its subcategories into image-guided therapy product development. This is an educational series and it consists of 8 online-based lectures and is really designed to give you an opportunity to learn about AI and understand the potential for AI in image-guided therapy and healthcare, as well as help you explore and navigate the principles underlying the challenges of integrating AI into healthcare technologies. This is an open license course. Anyone is welcome to attend. Lectures are being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing with French subtitles. I'll be posting the link for the channel in the general Zoom chat, but it will also be available shortly on our website at innovate.ca. With respect to the format, each lecture consists of a 45 or a 50-minute talk, which is typically followed by a Q&A session. A quick reminder to our attendees to use the Q&A chat option and not the general chat if you have any questions for our speaker. Our next lecture will take place on Thursday, May 6th, where we'll be talking about intellectual property protection of data-driven technologies. Please note that we do not have a lecture next week on April 29th. Registration for upcoming lectures will be shortly available on our website, again at innovate.ca. One final comment. When today's session ends, you will be prompted to answer a short survey, and please take the time to provide us with your feedback so we can improve these events in the future. Okay, so today I'm very delighted to be introducing our very special guest speaker, Dr. Mohammed Mamdani, who will be giving us an overview on applying data science and data science models in healthcare, with a very special focus on purpose, infrastructure, and methods. Throughout the past few lectures, we've previously talked about AI, cutting-edge research around neural networks and machine learning, and we also discussed the integration of AI and some of its subcategories like AR into image-guided therapy. But today, I think the big question will be, what are we doing with data science in healthcare? What are the applications and impacts? And so our guest speaker, Dr. Mamdani, is the Vice President of Data Science and Advanced Analytics at Unity Health Toronto and the Director of the University of Toronto Temerity Faculty of Medicine Center for Artificial Intelligence Education and Research in Medicine. Dr. Mamdani is also a professor in the Department of Medicine, the Faculty of Medicine, the Leslie Dan Faculty of Pharmacy, and the Institute of Health Policy, Management, and Evaluation of the Dell Lana Faculty of Public Health. He's also an adjunct senior scientist at the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences and a faculty affiliate of the Vector Institute. He holds a Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Michigan, a fellowship in pharmacoeconomics from the Detroit Medical Center, and a Master of Arts degree in econometric theory from Wayne State University, and a Master of Public Health from Harvard University. He has been previously named among Canada's top 40 under 40 and has published over 500 studies in peer-reviewed healthcare journals. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Dr. Mamdani.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. I've been asked to talk about how you apply data science in healthcare. And I think there's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence and data science. And a lot of people are still struggling with, all right, well, what does it mean to me as a clinician? What does it mean to me in the healthcare system? So I'm going to actually go through just a few objectives that I have. First is to better understand the concepts of data science, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. I think we use a lot of these interchangeably, and I just want to kind of make sure that we're all on the same baseline in terms of understanding concepts. The second is to better understand the application of artificial intelligence to clinical practice and how it can be used for things like forecasting and prediction and those sorts of things. And of course, then the third is to understand concepts through case examples that affect the interpretation and application of artificial intelligence solutions in clinical practice. I want to start by saying I am not an expert in image-guided therapy. I'm a pharmacist by training, and I have a couple of quantitative degrees in statistics and econometrics and epidemiology and such. And I tend to be a bit more of a generalist. But I think the purpose today is to kind of get those more general principles around, all right, how do you actually apply things like machine learning into actual clinical practice? I want to start off by just kind of commenting on the miracle of modern medicine. If we really think about it, medicine is spectacular. I mean, we've been able to accomplish so much in such a short period of time through evolutions of knowledge and understanding in medicine. For example, there are people who've lost their sight, and for some of these people, modern medicine can give that sight back to them. People who maybe shouldn't be able to walk because of some traumatic experiences or can't walk, for some of these people, we're able to make them walk. And that's incredibly powerful as well. For folks who have cancer, historically, who have really suffered really awful deaths, we're able to prolong life. That is absolutely powerful and incredible. Now, on the flip side, though, if we kind of think about medicine and the human body, it's pretty complicated. It's a very, very complex thing that we're talking about. The average human body, some would suggest, is composed of a lot of cells. And the cells actually have tons of processes going on inside each of these cells. And the estimates now are 70 trillion to 100 trillion cells in the average human body. A lot of it bacterial cells, some of it non-bacterial cells. But within each cell, there are about 100 trillion atoms. So you can imagine all sorts of processes that are all sorts of combinations and permutations that are possible to create disease. So if you believe in chaos theory and the butterfly effect, all it takes is one thing to go wrong and you have disease. With all of this complexity, you have to step back and say, how do we really understand disease? Sir William Osler, I think, said it quite well. Medicine is a science of uncertainty and an art of probability because it's so incredibly complicated. Some of the estimates that are out there is that we probably know about 10,000 to 30,000 different diseases that we've been able to document. I would argue there are way more diseases out there, but we only really know or recognize about 10 to 30,000 of them. Okay, how well do we understand these diseases? Well, there's about 500 or so of these diseases that actually have US FDA approved treatments. That's it. That's not very many. If we truly understood disease, if we truly understood pathophysiology, we'd have treatments for many more, wouldn't we? So it's not exactly easy. Medicine is really a knowledge-driven field, right? I mean, when you go to your doctor, what is a doctor, he or she, really doing? The doctor's basically trying to assemble as much information as possible, labs, medications, orders, vitals, all these sorts of data to say, this is what I think the prognosis is, or this is what I think the treatment plan should be. It's very, very knowledge-driven. But how much can we assimilate in our brain? A new healthcare study is published about every 2 minutes. So if you look at Medline, there's over 30 million studies there. About 1 million new studies are published each year. It's a lot of information to keep track of. Some studies don't agree with each other. How many of you have actually seen a publication of a pivotal randomized trial that says one thing and literally a few months later is another pivotal randomized trial that basically answers the same question but gives you the opposite answer? What do you believe? And of course, new therapies are emerging constantly. And because of all of this, expert opinions change over time. What we know today is very different than what we knew 10 years ago, is going to be very different than what we know 10 years from now. And that's okay, but that creates a lot of confusion often. So the stats that are out there, some may argue about the numbers and such, and some of these are good studies, some of them maybe not so great studies, but roughly what we see is that about a third of patients don't get treatments of proven effectiveness. A quarter of patients get care that is not needed or even potentially harmful. Up to 3/4 of patients don't get the information they need for decision making, and up to half of physicians don't get the evidence they need for decision making. That's a lot. So you have to think, all right, we're a knowledge-driven field, healthcare is. We have a lot of knowledge out there. So how can data and AI help? Well, the issue is underlying disease and prognosis. I would argue that we don't really understand disease and prognosis nearly as well as we'd like to. And I think that's a fair statement. The tools we have available, if you really think about it, are pretty crude and blunt, right? We have lab tests. We have some sort of inkling of what's happening in the blood. We have some vitals. Okay, I can get your heart rate and your temperature and stuff. That's pretty crude. We have medical images. We can look kind of what's going on in the organs in a very, again, crude way. Can we get at the atom level? No, of course not. But we have some rough sense of what's going on. And as sophisticated as we may sound with our fancy MRIs, it's really not that sophisticated, is it? I mean, in terms of what's happening in the actual body. Then we get into human capacity. We've got all of these things happening in at the same time. How much of this can we process? There's a famous psychologist named Miller who in the 1950s conducted these, I think, really nice experiments that was able to show that the average human can process 7 plus or minus 2 things at the same time. 7 plus or minus 2 things. And if you think about the complexity of what I've just talked about, there are way more than 7 plus or minus 2 things going on at any point in time. So it's a lot to process. And of course, as I've mentioned, medical care is driven by data. So what is the promise of AI? The promise is really the ability to process virtually unlimited data points in virtually unlimited ways. It's actually pretty impressive. Now, the running joke, though, is that the state of intelligence of AI these days is that of an 8-year-old. And that may not sound very impressive, but this is an 8-year-old that never forgets anything. The other thing is machine learning thrives on complexity. The complexity of data, it just really, really embraces. And that's what we struggle with as humans. Now, of course, there's some challenges of AI. There's the model versus data. You can basically have a ton of data, but which model do you fit? There's trust and over reliance. You've got a good model. Now we start relying on the model so much that we forget to be doctors. And there's, of course, limitations that we often forget about, like biases, like model performance in certain cases and outliers and such. And of course, there's the human AI bridge. There are lots of data scientists who can tell you, well, I built this 3D convolutional neural network or this other type of neural network, and it had X number of hidden layers. And other people will look at you with glazed eyes saying, what are you talking about? So that communication to understand, well, what does this model do? And what do I do with the model to make decisions for the patients I care for? That is a big challenge as well. So I'm going to go step back a little bit and go through some terminology. Things like AI and data science and such. I'm going to start with data science. So Wikipedia defines data science, and this is what a lot of people do is they Google and they get this definition from Wikipedia. It's a concept to unify statistics, data analysis, machine learning, and the related methods in order to understand and analyze actual phenomenon with data. I personally like this definition a lot better. Hal Varian is a chief economist at Google and a professor at Berkeley. He defines it as simply the ability to take data to be able to understand it, process it, extract value from it, visualize it, and to communicate it. Seems pretty straightforward. This is the data science life cycle. And it's actually pretty important, I think, because a lot of people may not understand the nuances, but it all starts from capturing data, right? You can't do AI really without data. You've got to start from capturing data. And if you look at healthcare, the way we capture data is humans kind of enter a lot of data. And, sometimes you get these lab tests and that's automated and such, but a lot of data we enter as humans. There's lots of potential for error there. We don't enter the right types of data sometimes. I know in Canada, for example, we have a really hard time on collecting data on ethnicity and race and such. If you don't have that data, you're not going to be able to deal with it effectively. So once you actually capture that data, then where do you put it? Where do you maintain it? Put it into a data warehouse or something to actually capture and maintain it. Once you actually have stored it and maintained it, then you can start kind of looking at it and saying, all right, well, is this clean data? Is this not so clean data? I'm going to do some little descriptive analysis. You get to process some of it. And then you get into the analysis part, the fun part, where you actually build the complicated models and sometimes you don't need them, but you get into models that can actually give you some insights. But then you move to communication. How do you communicate what the models are telling you in a meaningful way to result in impact? All of this is the data science cycle. And you could argue that anyone from entering the data to maintaining it, to processing it, to analyzing it, communicating it is a data scientist at the end of the day. So of course, then you go on to artificial intelligence. What is AI? Well, if you look at Google, Google Dictionary suggests that it is the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. Basically, doing a lot of the stuff that we would normally do, but it's faster, it's more efficient, and it's probably more accurate. It makes life easy for us. And it also can do things that we may not be able to do very easily, like prognosis. AI is driven by data science. So data science really enables AI. How do computers learn? Well, they learn with lots of data, lots and lots of data. But I would argue, a lot of people say, well, it's the neural networks and the machine learning. I would argue it's not that at all. Actually, we've known about neural nets since the 1950s. It's actually an old concept. The real advancements have been around where we store data and how we store data and processing. Processing is the ability to look through data really, really quickly. And we made lots of advancements over the past couple of decades in that space. And the third thing I would say is rules. I'd mentioned that AI, the state of intelligence, I would say argue is probably that of an 8-year-old. Well, an 8-year-old needs guidance. Right? Oftentimes, if you give an 8-year-old a pair of scissors, I don't know why you would, but let's say you did, you want to tell the 8-year-old, well, you hold it this way, you don't run with it, you walk, you look both ways. There's some rules that actually help the 8-year-old understand how to function and move. And that's kind of what's needed for a lot of machine learning approaches, especially the supervised learning approaches that are being undertaken now. So what's a neural network? Machine learning, foundation of it is neural networks. So neural networks are basically a pretty sophisticated way of understanding how you go from all sorts of predictors to an outcome. Right, so let's say you wanted to look at the success of somebody in terms of university grades. What determines if you're going to be successful in university? Well, there's all sorts of things like your age, if you have a part-time job, your education, the city you live in, all sorts of stuff will go into that output. But how these variables interact with each other can be very complicated. So there can be all sorts of linear combinations and nonlinear combinations. The nice thing about machine learning models is that they are very good at handling complexity and nonlinearity in data. That's where they shine. So it can handle an incredible amount of complex relationships. And the more complex it is, the more kind of hidden layers, I guess you could say, the deep blue circles that you see, the more of these hidden layers you'll have to handle that complexity. And then you can actually predict that outcome in a much more flexible, comprehensive way than what we've been used to. So again, I'm going to go back to data. And I'm going to go through this example of the self-driving car. Why am I talking about self-driving cars? Well, if you think about it, a self-driving car is just a car with a bunch of sensors, right? You've got radar, LiDAR, sonar, GPS. They just sit on a car and you're just collecting data all the time. Now, what the car manufacturers did was, well, it wasn't car manufacturers, it was other people, but that whole sector, what they did was they did something really smart. And they said, we're going to actually do this on purpose in terms of collecting the data, storing it, processing it rapidly for intentional actions. And so you've got this really nice process where you've deliberately thought about how you collect data, put it in a place, process it, and then get action out of it. Now, why am I telling you about self-driving cars? If you think about it again, you got all this data, the car knows there's a red light, so I have to stop. My GPS says take a right turn here to get to the location, but wait a minute, my cameras are saying somebody's crossing, so I've got to keep here and stop. And wait a minute, it's raining, so my sensors are going to go off. It does all this within milliseconds. Phenomenal, very intentional, very disciplined, very purposeful. I'm going to go to healthcare. If you think about it, the body is kind of the same thing, isn't it? How do we as humans ingest data? Well, we actually ingest data through our 5 senses. We see, we smell, we touch, we taste. So we have 5 senses that actually are bringing data into our body. And one of our main mechanisms of assembling all that data is our brain, right? Kind of the same thing as a car. And then we actually move our hands and we talk and we actually have action. Now in a hospital, we're always emitting data. We get lab tests done, we get pee samples and poop samples, and we get images done, and we get vitals done and heart rates and all that sort of stuff. Where does all that data go? I hate to say it, but we're not as disciplined with what we do with that data. We just got to dump it. And it's often a mess. This is a schematic of a typical hospital where we have over 50 different source systems that don't really talk to each other very well. So you can't really do much with it in its current state. The good news is, though, we're actually starting to digitize a lot of healthcare. We've got, I know the pandemic has been awful, but one of the kind of silver linings of the pandemic is it's forced us to be more digital with virtual care, for example. We see a lot of that happen now. More and more hospitals are moving to electronic medical records or electronic patient records. And I know some people have mixed feelings about it, but I think groups like Epic and Cerner, they're actually kind of forcing us to be more digital and electronic, which I think has a lot of benefits because now we're saying, oh my gosh, we're really capturing a lot of this data electronically. We're doing it well. Now, more and more groups are starting to think about where do I store it? How do I process it? How do I use it to actually help me help my patients? So I think there's a lot of potential here. There's a survey about 200 US healthcare decision makers a few years ago around data and AI. And some of the conclusions were actually quite good. 91% of respondents believe that AI will be used in clinical decision support. 84% believe that companies who do not invest in AI will fall behind. 83% believe AI will improve the accuracy of medical diagnoses. And one of the interesting stats was that over a third of participants said they're already using AI. So this is not some fictional thing. People actually believe they're already using artificial intelligence in the healthcare sector, which again is really exciting. There's lots of emerging health data science centers. For example, there's a partnership between the Mass General and Brigham Women and Harvard around the Center for Clinical Data Science. And I think they do a lot of really impressive medical imaging work here. There's a Center for Digital Health Innovation at UCSF. There's also the University of Aberdeen Center for Health Data Science. Right here in Toronto, there is the Lee Cushing Center for Healthcare Analytics Research and Training at St. Michael's Hospital at Unity Health Toronto. So there's a lot of activity. I want to step back though and tell you about the problem with machines learning though. So there's excitement, seems to be a momentum here, lots of people investing resources into this. I'm going to use the example of Microsoft Tay. This was a chatbot. This is, I believe, in 2016, where Microsoft had this great idea to say, you know what, we're going to teach a chatbot or a machine to learn how to talk to people. It's going to be amazing. So we're going to put this out and it's just going to start talking to people and learning all sorts of things. It's going to be able to converse with humans. So the concept here is let's release to the public this chatbot that talks to them. The bot will learn from human conversations on how to talk to people. The input will be what the people tell it, and it'll pick up on that. And the output will be learned conversations that mimic humans. So in essence, you wouldn't be able to differentiate between a human and a chatbot when you're actually messaging it. Great in theory. So what happened is they released Tay into Twitter. And the Twitter universe, the trolls just jumped on Tay and taught it to be extremely racist and misogynistic. And it had to be pulled within 24 hours. So the challenge here is great idea, but there's a lot of biases out there and a lot of people who actually may not do what you think they're going to do. And machines will learn what you feed it. So you have to be really careful about the data that goes into a machine learning model. There's lots of other examples. I just mentioned Tay. I think the previous speaker had talked about IBM Watson and its challenges. In some cases, there's a lot of hope with this IBM Watson platform that would ingest a lot of literature. So thousands and thousands of published randomized clinical trials. And it would be able to say, based on these studies and this patient profile, this is the treatment recommendation or A, B, and C. The unfortunate part was that oftentimes the generalizability of randomized trials is actually quite poor usually. So in a typical randomized trial, you'd exclude 80 to 90% of the patients that you typically see. And the ludicrous part about all this is we often expect our clinicians to then apply that knowledge to the rest of the population they treat, which doesn't make any sense. But it's hard for a computer to decipher that. And so oftentimes what would happen is it would give recommendations that just didn't make much sense or actually potentially harmful. So it didn't really go over quite well. The last example I'm going to give is with Google's initiative in Thailand, where Google had created this really nice algorithm that was able to detect diabetic retinopathy on ocular images. And the government in Thailand had said, we've got this massive screening campaign and we'd love to be able to make it more efficient with artificial intelligence. And so there was this nice collaboration. The unfortunate part was that the real world images were actually not quite the same as what the algorithm had trained on. And the algorithm had trained on really nice, clean, pristine images. But in the real world, there's lighting issues. There's all sorts of issues that come in, and about 20% of the images it wasn't able to do much with them. And so patients had to be rescheduled, and they were really upset people, and it just didn't really go well. So that had to be kind of slowed down as well. So again, lots and lots of learnings here. The key thing that becomes important in data science and implementation is the need to evaluate data science. So here's an example of a study that was published in Europe. Really nice study where this is not a machine learning model. It's actually a fairly simple clinical prediction rule, where what they did was very, very, I have to say hats off to the investigators, because I think they did a really good job in publishing this study so we can learn from their experience. The issue here is febrile urinary tract infection. So the concept here is somebody comes in with pain in their lower back and a fever, and you're trying to assess things, and you say, I think you've got a febrile urinary tract infection. So my decision is either I admit you or I send you home on antibiotics. So how do you do that effectively? We're actually not very good at it. So the clinicians thought, maybe we should actually have a prediction rule that will help our clinicians decide what to do. So they randomized, I think it was about 30 different groups or so, to using the prediction tool versus not using the prediction tool. And what they found was in the intervention group, sure, you actually saw a decrease in hospital admission, but for the people who were sent home, the number of people who came back because of complications was 4-fold higher in the intervention group than in the control group. So they actually had to shut the study down early because of fears of harm. So there are a lot of learnings here. One is the research question. I would argue that a lot of clinicians, we're not very good at diagnosing febrile urinary tract infection. And if we're not very good at it, can we really expect an automated prediction tool to be good at it? And some would argue maybe, because it can handle complexity better, but it's harder to do. The data in this study, first, the investigators want to look at outcomes in terms of 30-day mortality, but realized the data just wouldn't allow them to do that. So they have to kind of look at other stuff. The modeling was actually based on a pneumonia severity index, but with the lab values removed. I'm thinking maybe it would have been better just to kind of develop a model for the kidneys, because it's the kidneys that you're worried about in this study, not the lungs. And of course, there's implementation. There was some feedback around clinicians not being familiar with the tool. So I don't know if there was a lot of education that was being done, but about 1/3 of low risk recommendations were actually overruled. So was there even a lot of good compliance with the tool? So a lot of things can go wrong when you actually deploy. So is the momentum for AI shifting? A lot of limitations as we gain these experiences in the real world are helping us kind of rethink about how we actually approach AI. So I'm going to go through some real examples that we have. So again, this is a bit self-serving, but I'm close to these examples because I lead a team of data scientists at Unity Health Toronto and at St. Michael's Hospital. And we actually develop and deploy solutions into clinical practice. So I can tell you about our experience. So just as a quick background, I'm going to talk specifically at St. Michael's Hospital. So Unity Health Toronto is a composition of 3 centers: St. Michael's, St. Joseph's, and Providence. And our base, where a lot of us are based at St. Michael's, and that's where we've had our early experience. So St. Michael's Hospital is a tertiary care teaching hospital in downtown Toronto, established in 1892 with the founding goal of taking care of the sick and the poor in Toronto's inner city. We're one of 2 adult trauma centers in the Greater Toronto area. We have over 400, so it's actually a bit more now, close to 500 beds and numerous outpatient clinics, over 6,000 staff, over 900 physicians, over 1,600 nurses. We have about 75 to 80,000 emergency department visits a year. That was pre-pandemic, over 500,000 ambulatory visits, and over 25,000 inpatient visits. The reason why I'm telling you all this is the volumes. So multiply this by about 12 to 14 years of historical data, and that is a really good amount of data points that you could be working with. We also have a research institute, and we're fully affiliated with the University of Toronto. So how do we actually move from AI development to application? So what we did was we actually stepped back and we said, okay, so we want to do AI in a hospital setting for real. Okay, so let's take a look at our data environment. And we said, oh my gosh, no, we can't hire data scientists to work with this, because they're just going to say, are you kidding me? You expect me to work with this? So we actually spent 3 years. We contracted with a vendor to actually create a enterprise data warehouse that is really suited for analytics. So it's actually built with data scientists for data scientists in mind. And it was a bit different than how a lot of data warehouses are built, because we really wanted to make it amenable to AI. So we built our data warehouse, our data environment, and then we hired a bunch of data scientists. And the way we hired them was we said, we're not just going to hire a bunch of computer scientists. We want to listen to what end users want, because we want deployment. So when we talked to our clinicians, our administrators, people on the ground, they're telling us all sorts of use cases and problems. And we said, we can't just hire one stream of data scientists. We need three. Computer science, with the focus on natural language processing, on machine learning, deep learning, on vision learning. We need to hire operations research engineers with a focus on simulation modeling and optimization. And we also need to hire statisticians. So that's what we did. We hired 3 streams of data scientists. And they, of course, said, well, we want tools. And of course you want tools. You want Python and R and TensorFlow and PyTorch and all these kind of wonderful tools to actually leverage through the data warehouse. And so we have this nice kind of ecosystem of data scientists, good data to work with, and AI tools. Of course, the next part is, well, all right, let's get cracking and answer some questions and solve some real problems. And the rule we quickly deployed was, yeah, you're not allowed to ask questions. And the data scientists said, what? We're not allowed to ask questions? Yeah, you're not allowed to ask questions because, quite frankly, I don't think you know what goes on in a cardiothoracic surgery procedure. Do you? No, I don't, but I know what goes on in a neural net. Great, so you're not gonna try and solve a problem in cardiothoracic surgery. Why don't we ask the cardiothoracic surgeons what they need? So our model is the end users get to ask the questions. Anybody can ask a question, but there are some criteria that they have to fill in order to be able to pose those questions to us. So then what happens is we say, all right, we look to the other environment and said, all right, well, who in the hospital has an issue? And you can imagine there's a lot of chaos in the hospitals. We're going to bring them together. So the end users then work with our data scientists. They pose the questions. And what we say to the end users is you don't get to just pose the question. If this is important to you, you're going to sit in our meetings every 2 weeks for the next 3 to 6 months as we develop and deploy the solution into practice. You have to be that vested in it. So I know you have a lot of things to do. So do we. We got to work together on this, and we got to co-create. That's really been the secret of how we've been able to develop and deploy models for questions that are actually meaningful. So we go off and we do a bunch of projects. We've got between 15 to 20 projects that we work on at any point in time, all the way from our emergency department to our internal medicine unit to multiple sclerosis clinic. We're all over the place. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things. The first example was our emergency department came to us and they said, here's our problem, volumes. I don't know if many of you have been to the emergency department, but there's often a wait and you wait a long time. That's one of the big problems in the emergency department. A lot of times we have surges in our volumes, and a lot of times we have a hard time understanding when the surges happen. And how do you address that? Well, you get in more people, so you can actually call a nurse to come in and work an extra shift, or you can ask the emergency medicine doctor to stay for an hour or two longer to deal with the volumes, but you have to know when they occur. So the question was very simple. How do we manage emergency department volumes and wait times? Because it is really busy. Our goal is that if we knew ahead of time, if we could predict our volumes, we could actually staff better instead of reacting at the last minute, which is what we typically do. And this would actually really help. So of course, our mighty data science team said, of course we can do this. So we actually developed this algorithm. What it does is it updates very regularly. It actually looks at 4 years of historical data. It grabs weather data. So is there a snowstorm tomorrow night? It grabs city planning data. Are the Raptors playing at the Scotiabank Arena tomorrow night? Is there a marathon happening on Lakeshore Boulevard? Is it a long weekend or a short weekend? It factors all of that stuff in, and it actually predicts 7 days in advance, but we display 3 days, how many patients are going to come to the emergency department. And it does it with between 94 to 96% accuracy typically. So today is Thursday. We can tell you Friday, tomorrow, from noon to 6, there'll be 82 patients in the emergency department. 10 of them will have mental health issues. 12 of them will be high acuity, and the rest will be lower acuity with between 94 and 96% accuracy. We put this in a very nice visual that people can look at and see, and then that is actually what drives decision-making. So at St. Michael's Hospital, typically we actually look at this, and again, pre-pandemic, 5 to 6 times a day for decision-making around, all right, how do the next 3 days look? How are we going to plan this? And there's a tab on here for the next 7 days and trends and all that sort of stuff if you'd like. But it really helps to give you a quick snapshot to say, these are our volumes. Here's how we should be planning staffing. Now, this isn't the entire story. This is the short version. Here's what really happened. So what really happened was the emergency department folks came to us and they said, here's our problem. And we said, please go away and let us flex our muscles and do the data science part. So we had our data scientists kind of develop these incredible models and really sophisticated and all that sort of nice stuff. And of course, without any input from the end users. And we went to the end users and said, we're done, here you go, it is magic. And of course they looked at us and they said, it's not magic at all. It's actually utterly useless to us. Number one, you're not even looking at the right things that we care about. We want it split by this, this, and this. Number two, your timings are way off. You realize the shifts that we work in, right? We need 6-hour intervals to be reported. And these are the sorts of things that we need to be looking at. So it was very humbling for us to say, we don't live in that world, but we need to. So this is where we really drove our co-creation model. And we said, look, we've got to work with you. So this is where we brought people together, and we were working on a very regular basis with the end users because they really wanted this. And that's how we actually created the models that actually ended up working quite well. Now, the problem at that point, though, was we've got these really eager clinicians and administrators. We've got our data science team. Everybody's thinking this is awesome. Okay, well, now we say, we built the models. What do you want to see? And we got so excited because this is the first time we're actually doing this. They said, we want to see everything. We said, really? You want to see everything? They said, we said everything. I said, okay, there's about 100 data points on this dashboard. Are you really going to be able to sift through all this and get the information they need? Yes, everything. So we created the most ridiculously ugly dashboard that you could imagine. It was hideous. It was horrible, but it felt like home because we all were like, we're so eager, let's just create something. We didn't really think it through that well. And so for the next month, nobody looked at it because it was just too complicated. And so that's when we brought in artists. We actually brought in somebody with expertise in human factors, somebody who understands design. And they actually came in and they said, you don't get 100 variables, you get 9. What are the 9 that you want? Let's talk about font. Let's talk about color. Let's talk about sizing. We need to talk about these things so it's actually usable for you. And they were fantastic in helping us create an actual visual that people actually could interact with and use. And that's where we got more regular use, 5 to 6 times a day, that then drove staffing to see benefit and outcomes. Second example I'm going to give you is around clinical outcomes prediction. So this is an actual case at our hospital. This is from a couple of years ago. The patient is a 73-year-old retired nurse with an inflamed gallbladder or cholecystitis. And it was an internal medicine patient. She had a diagnostic procedure done, an ERCP or an endoscopic retrograde cholangiopancreatography. The plan was discharge home for the next day, but the physician was called at 6:30 p.m. The patient had shortness of breath. The physician ordered a chest x-ray and labs. Vital signs were checked twice overnight at midnight and 6 a.m. The physician was called at 8:30 for decreased blood pressure, distress, and the patient was transferred to the step-up unit, and the critical care response team was called. Now, the patient did not want to be transferred to the ICU, and unfortunately, she died in step-up that day. The family was understandably distraught at the sudden deterioration and said we would never have left her bedside. She was suffering. Now, our internists came to us and they said, look, this is what we want to avoid. And of course, our response was, well, would she have died anyway? What could you have done? And they said, well, there's lots that we could have done. The issue is that 1 out of 12 internal medicine patients will die in hospital. So what can we do? We could have increased monitoring, go to Q4 monitoring. We could be looking at signs of sepsis and initiating antibiotics. We could call the critical care response team earlier. We could say, we've done the assessment and there's not much we're going to be able to do, but let's at least let you live or let you actually have a comfortable, dignified death and communicate that to the family. Those are the things that could have been done. When could they have been done? Much earlier, much earlier. Had we known that this is a high-risk patient, we could have actually deployed all these interventions. So the question was, can we predict who will die so we can intervene earlier? So of course, that's what our team did. So we actually have an AI early warning system. This has been deployed in, I think it was late August, early September of 2020. So we waited, we were testing, and then the COVID hit, and we were seeing these high rates of mortality in our general internal medicine units. And we said, we're just going to pull the plug and deploy it. So this has been running at St. Michael's Hospital for the past few months. If you are a patient in our internal medicine unit, you will be monitored by AI. All of our patients are. This is just how we do things. Now, what we've been able to show with this algorithm is the accuracy is pretty good, but that's not the whole story. The key thing that I want to highlight here is when you look at these algorithms, the positive predictive value, the precision, the recall, the sensitivity, the specificity, the accuracy, they're not that important. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. What's way more important is the AI better than a doctor? You need clinical validation. So what we were able to do is we were able to show with over 3,000 clinician predictions, we actually literally went to the floors and said, so do you think this patient's going to die or go to the ICU? And we recorded it. And we compared over 3,000 clinician predictions to our algorithm. And we were able to show that it was at least 20% better than clinician prediction. And that gave clinicians a lot more comfort to say, all right, maybe we should give this a go and give it a chance. So of course, the proof's in the pudding. What do we see in terms of mortality? Now, this is among the high-risk alerted patients. So what this algorithm does is every hour, it ingests data for all of our internal medicine patients. So every single hour, it's ingesting over 100 data points for each of our patients in our internal medicine unit. And what it does is it categorizes patients as red, yellow, and green. So low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And what it does is it tells you about this patient's risk of dying or going to the ICU at least 24 hours in advance. So you have a heads up to say, I think I need to pay more attention to this patient. So how has this worked? So when we look at our data, our mortality rates among the high-risk patient population is from January to March of 2020. This is during COVID, actually just at the beginning of COVID. If we compare it to the past 4 years of the same January-March timeframe, 2016 to 2019, in 2020, we saw a 35% increase in mortality. And again, this is preliminary data, but I think it's actually pretty compelling. In April to June, we saw a 70% increase in mortality. July to September, a 37% increase in mortality. We deployed ChartWatch, and fortunately, we saw a 21% reduction in mortality in October to December of 2020. And of course, these are preliminary numbers, but we do also have lots of anecdotes. This is one of them. One of our attendings wrote us a note. The resident on call overnight received a high-risk alert around 11 p.m. She went and reviewed the chart and saw the patient as per the recommended protocol. He was relatively stable. But approximately 2 hours later, she received a call from the nurse that the patient was decompensating. As she already knew the patient, she was able to quickly assess at the bedside and get the ICU team involved. The patient went to the ICU, but did not, thankfully, have a respiratory arrest, which was certainly a risk if the intervention had not been done as quickly. The resident feels that the AI program made a big impact. So these are the sorts of things that we'd like to see for our patients and how we leverage AI to really drive care. So some of the key considerations for applying AI in healthcare, in data infrastructure, governance, and quality. It all starts there. If you don't have the right data, you're not going to have good models. So a lot of emphasis needs to be placed on high quality, readily accessible, and timely data. That's incredibly important as well. It is no good if you have data that are 6 months old when you're trying to predict what's going to happen in the next hour. The other thing we need is to think about modeling issues. So in our example that I gave you about this thing that monitors patients and predicts death and ICU transfer, we had lots of complex ensemble models with these really sophisticated machine learning models that a whole bunch of them would predict things. And then we said, if something fails, how are we possibly going to track this down to fix it? And we ended up going with a more simple model that kind of did the same thing as these complex models because it was so much easier to deploy. And I would say, even if you take a little hit on performance, go with the simple model because it's much more easier to fix and maintain. And are we really going to see a difference between something that has a difference of 0.2 or even 2% on a performance metric? Probably not. So simplicity usually wins. Adapting model performance, precision versus recall. What do I mean by this? Models are never always right. They're going to have some error. But what levels of error are acceptable to the clinician? If you have an algorithm that goes off all the time, and the clinician says, seriously, that's my 10th alarm today, and it only gets it right 1 out of 10 times, that's not good. The clinicians are not going to listen to it, and they're going to say, this is a total waste of my time, because it doesn't even get it right most of the time. You need to balance how many patients you're going to capture with the algorithm and how many you're going to get it right, so you don't frustrate the end user pool. It's actually a social game as much as it is an actual machine learning game. And of course, there's a feedback loop issue. These are just some examples on modeling. What do I mean by that? If we deploy the algorithm, we got to retrain it at some point. But you've deployed an algorithm that now physicians and nurses are changing their behavior. That changes their outcomes. That data is now affected by the algorithm. Can you really train on that well? It's called the feedback loop issue. What are you going to train on once you've deployed? Because now the new data has behavior change in it. So those are some of the challenges that you want to consider from a modeling perspective. And of course, there's end user engagement. That is absolutely fundamental. Understanding that the clinicians or your end user audience wants to use a certain tool, wants the tool. Also understanding their workflow, how they behave, how they work. absolutely critical, not only to model selection, but its actual development and parameter, how you actually develop the parameters and such, but also deployment. And don't underestimate the time investment for successful deployment. And also, once you've implemented, you got to maintain it. And that takes time and energy as well. Testing and evaluation, need for extensive testing and validation. And I want to highlight again, you can validate your model, but what's, I think, in my opinion, incredibly important is clinical validation to show that you can actually improve what's already being done. There's the issue of over-reliance, because some people may say, I'm just going to trust this algorithm and not be a doctor. That's not a good idea. I think you actually, this should be put in the context of this is helping augment clinicians, not replacing them. And of course, ethical and legal considerations. Yeah, we have to go through issues like, what if the algorithm says this patient's going to die? The clinician doesn't do anything because they don't believe it, and then the patient dies. Does somebody get sued? There's all sorts of ethical legal considerations as well that go into these decisions. Just another example is actually, in the interest of time, I'm going to flip over this, but we basically have an algorithm now that for anyone who comes to our emergency department with a head CT, they will actually get an algorithm that grabs the CT, reads it, and says, yep, there's a bleed, here's a subtype, and here's where it's located within minutes. Goes right back to our information system, and it color codes the person in purple, and then moves them right up to the queue. So the radiologist looks at it now rather than 3 hours from now to get an immediate diagnosis of intracranial hemorrhage. And again, that's not something that is research anymore. It is what we do at our hospital. That's how we actually manage patients. And again, great accuracy there, over 94%. And the aim here is to decrease turnaround time to a radiology diagnosis from over 3 hours to under 15 minutes. The last example I'm going to give before I start wrapping up is there's a really kind of neat initiative going on at UHN, a surgeon there, Dr. Amin Madani, who's looking at laparoscopic cholecystectomy. And what he's done, he's got this really neat AI tool where he's looking at identifying dangerous zones for dissection. So the green is safe, the red is not safe. It'll actually kind of guide in terms of where you can poke. And the goal is to actually reduce the probability of major bile duct injury. And I thought that was actually pretty fascinating because it actually changes in real time, and it actually uses some pretty sophisticated methodologies here, which I think is pretty spectacular. So to highlight here, I want to reiterate the data environment comes first. If you want to get into this space, you've got to look at your data environment. Then you get into the analytics. Once you have the analytics, you've got to have a really concerted effort around product development to make it user-friendly, to be able to resonate with the end users in a very simple way that they can understand, because they have a million other things to worry about. And then, of course, once you've deployed it, the other thing is deploying it. That's a challenge in and of itself because there's all sorts of change management issues. How do you evaluate it to make sure you're helping patients and not harming them or wasting resources? And it goes back to that cycle again of the data environment. So education, just a couple of points there. How do you learn about AI if this is of interest to you? There's lots of programs out there. There's, for people who want that hardcore, I want to be a computer scientist and know how to code, one that's really good is the MSc program at the University of Toronto. But that's not for the faint of heart. This is actually more meant for computer science people. There's also lots of online courses. There's one by Stanford by Andrew Ng that's actually quite good. There are other crash courses from Google and Amazon that are actually pretty decent. And of course, there's here in Toronto for clinicians and non-AI people, there's certificate programs, one from the Michener Institute that is launched. I'm going to talk about TCARM very briefly. This is the University of Toronto Centre for AI Research and Education in Medicine. Anyone can join. Actually, to be a member, you have to be part of the University of Toronto community, but you can be on the mailing list and you can access a lot of the resources on the site. In the next few months, we're actually going to have a section on education where you can go there and say, I'm a novice, and where do I really start? Because I don't know what this machine learning or AI stuff is. There's going to be a stream for you where we would actually curate and recommend programs to say, here's where you should start. There'll be workshops and stuff as well. Then there's a middle stream of, I'm an intermediate, I kind of know how to code a little bit and I understand some of the basics. There's a stream for you. And of course, there's a stream for more advanced people as well. And this will actually serve as a nice resource for people to be able to learn more about AI. I'm going to touch on a few types of AI literacy. So there's data literacy, there's AI development literacy, there's deployment literacy, there's evaluation literacy. So there's a lot of areas to learn around AI in terms of not only just how do you build the models, but how do you deploy it? How do you evaluate it? All these things are so critical that we have to keep a lens that there's a lot of different learning points around AI. And if you're reading a paper, if you just want to understand what are the big things I should be looking for, there's lots of guidelines that have come out and that will continue to come out for randomized trials. There's a Consort AI extension that's actually quite good. Gives you a little bit of a check mark to say, or a checkbox to say, did they do this, 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 and this in terms of reporting? So it'll help you kind of sift through those papers. If you're developing a protocol, there's a Spirit AI extension. Also, there's Tripod, and something that will be coming out soon is the Tripod AI statement that is more around model development. So when you're reading an article that develops AI models, there'll be a whole checklist to say, did they do this, 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 and this? And it'll actually help you understand, do they give me all the information that I really need? So there's a lot of activity, and I know I should probably stop now and address some questions. So I'm going to end there. But I really want to iterate the message that I think this is a really exciting space. Especially for image-guided therapy and practically everything in healthcare. And I'm really, really excited for what the future holds. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mamdani, for a very inspiring talk and for providing very interesting perspectives on data science and its implementation in healthcare and the types of healthcare issues data science may be able to address. You've shared great examples of applied data science in healthcare, so thank you so much for that. I guess I'll open it up now for questions, but I'll start by a question I have. You talked about the key considerations for applying AI in healthcare and emphasized the importance of data infrastructure and the quality of data and accessibility. Can you elaborate more on where do we stand right now with respect to sharing of health data in Canada and perhaps our data collection infrastructure? And perhaps, do you think our Canadian healthcare system is prepared and well-resourced to kind of deploy or implement or perhaps co-create and support this kind of innovation?
That's a great question. I think that's where we need to start, because I would suggest we are not where we need to be when it comes to data and sharing data in healthcare. And I do think, yes, the system's complex and there's lots of players. I don't think those are really excuses anymore, to be honest. There are other people who do this, right? I mean, if we look at some of the models that exist at MIT, they have the PhysioNet platform, where data from Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital is cut fairly regularly now, and it's de-identified patient-level data. And if you're a researcher from an accredited university, you have TCPS2 training, which a lot of researchers do, and you sign a data user agreement and just click I agree on there, you have access to data, and you're able to do some really neat research. It's pretty easy. I mean, they've been doing it for 15 years. Why can't we do that here? I think the issues around, well, it's legislation and it's process. No, I think those are all real kind of smoke screens. I think this can be done. We just really need to be more organized and disciplined.
Thank you very much. We have a few questions from the attendees. I guess the first one is, as you mentioned, what has allowed AI to forge ahead has been the curation of the data. Part of this process is also convincing hospitals to improve the way in which we store medical data. So how do we inspire and convince hospitals that this is a worthwhile pursuit?
It's an investment. There was a time where a lot of administrators would balk at the idea of an electronic medical record. And, here we are. EPRs are, or electronic patient records are gaining momentum. Lots and lots of hospitals moving into this space because people are realizing the benefits of it. The next step is going to be, wow, we've digitized things. There's a lot of data here. What do we do with it? I think it's only natural that in time, it'll come. People will understand that they need to leverage the data. For people who are not so patient and don't want to wait, I think you're going to start to see more and more examples that you can point to say, not only will AI and data science save lives, but it'll save you money as well. And that should be your business case to say, we need to invest in this.
Another question, do you think the AI applications that you developed for St. Mike's could be transferable and used at other hospitals? What would be some considerations?
It's a great question. The ED volume forecasting tool that I had mentioned, we've actually deployed it in, I think, 4 or 5 hospitals now. And we've done this because we thought it was the right thing to do. But here's the challenges with deploying at other places. We're one hospital. are we going to now deploy it at 100 hospitals? We're not resourced to do that. We're not going to be their IT support. So we need actually a thoughtful approach to commercialization to be able to deploy these solutions in a scalable, sustainable manner. So we're now really stepping back and thinking, how do we do this in a fair way, in a reasonable way, that we can actually get these technologies to other places? So I absolutely think that some of these solutions, not all, some of these solutions are very deployable in other places. We just have to figure out the right model so it is sustainable and fair to everybody.
Another question, are there any efforts towards building a Canada-wide biomedical database like the UK Biobank?
Yes, actually, there are numerous efforts. I'm not sure if they're successful, but there are efforts. I think there's a desire to do this. In fact, there are provincial groups now around provincial common data platforms. So you may have heard of the Ontario Health Data Platform. So there's been some initiatives there. There's a national group that I'm actually involved in, thinking around, well, how do we develop a national repository or platform for data? And again, I think as time goes on, there's going to be more and more interest, more and more energy put into this, because people are going to realize more and more that we are becoming more and more digital. There's more data there, and we have to be able to leverage it in an intelligent way.
Thank you. Another question, when you consider the number of decisions that are made in healthcare and the amount of data that would need to be collected and analyzed, doesn't the problem seem overwhelming?
Absolutely. But again, I would argue, I'm looking at the self-driving car. How many types of sensors do we have? Quite a few. They're all data streams, right? In healthcare, what do we have? Labs, medications, orders, vitals, waveforms, medical imaging. Those are kind of the basic things, clinical notes. I don't think it's that overwhelming when you think about what the self-driving car can do. I just think we need to have the discipline that the automobile industry and the self-driving car folks had to do the same thing in healthcare.
Thank you very much. Another question, what advantages does Canada have, if any, over the US in developing health data science commercial products?
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if we have advantages or disadvantages, to be honest. I think we're very different. In my humble opinion, I think we tend to be more collaborative in Canada because that's our culture. But I think the US is much more entrepreneurial. And so I think they have an advantage there. There's all sorts of rules that we try and create, unfortunately, that make it harder to commercialize. So I would say that the US has their strengths, we have ours. And what I would advocate for is understanding how we leverage our strengths much more effectively than we have in the past.
Thank you very much. What type of tools do you provide to understand what machine learning has learned, and therefore what information and decisions provided to health professionals are based on?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat that question?
What type of tools could you provide to understand what machine learning has learned, and therefore what information and decisions provided to health professionals are based on? I'm not sure I understand the second part.
Yeah, not entirely clear on the question. I mean, if I understand it correctly, in terms of evaluating machine learning model, it'll really depend on the question. So a lot of people will jump to area under the curve or area under the precision recall curve and these kind of metrics without really thinking about, well, what is the problem that I'm trying to address? And if you're trying to address a prognosis problem, maybe you need to focus on precision and recall. Whereas if you're trying to more a detection problem, maybe you want to focus on negative predictive value and specificity. So depending on the nature of the question that you ask, you'll have different measures that you'll want to look at for the model. And those are the things that you'll want to communicate to the physician or the nurse or whoever the end user is. So I would argue, tackle the problem first, then understand what it is that they need to know and what their risk threshold and tolerance is or are, and then actually get at the model performance metrics that actually then are amenable to what the end users need.
Right. Just a couple more questions. Is the 94% accuracy realistic for machine learning models in health science studies in general?
Yeah, the 94% accuracy is a very simplistic thing. And I was actually kind of debating, should I actually show that number or not? Because it's so simplistic. It oversimplifies the issue considerably. If you want to look at pure accuracy, I would say, yeah, there are machine learning models that get 99+% accuracy. So it's very realistic. But the key question is going to go back to, what do end users need? So if I'm looking at my ChartWatch example, I'm going to need to know well, okay, what percentage of deaths and ICU transfers does my algorithm capture? Does it capture 50% of them, 70% of them, 80% of them? And when it captures a case, how often is it wrong? How often is it right? So that's going to be your classic precision recall balance. And then I'm going to go to the clinician and say, it's only capturing 60% of cases. But when I look at you, you only capture 30%. So 60% is pretty good. And when it captures it, it's right 40% of the time. But when you do it, you're right 20% of the time. So it's still better. But is that good enough? But in other cases, you'll say, well, you capture 20 and this one does a 25. Is it really worth the gain? Are you really going to get much out of it? It's those sorts of discussions that you start having rather than the overall number of 94% or 98% or whatever have you.
Thank you very much. One final question. How do you get around the data silos in hospitals and reports that are non-standardized or not synoptic?
Completely. Excellent question. We have a whole team just dedicated to data integration and governance for that exact issue. How do you actually grab data from source systems? And we have a pretty old environment right now where if you touch a source system, it could break. We've had to bring in data virtualization type of capabilities, and we have ETL developers and data engineers, and their whole job is how do you extract data efficiently without breaking things? How do you standardize? How do you integrate? How do you build that data pipeline? That then goes to our second team, which is the advanced analytics team. That's where our data scientists and our modelers and our computer scientists sit. So you've got to put some resource into the data piece, and then you get to the advanced analytics piece. And the third team we have is around productization. So we actually have the head of that group is an artist. And it's amazing because he's an artist who woke up one day and said, I think I'm getting a master's degree in machine learning and computer science that focuses on machine learning. So he actually has a master's degree in computer science and machine learning as an artist, but it gives you that perspective of now that you've got the data pipeline, the model's done, how do I then build something that people are going to love to use? And it has to be that whole spectrum.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mamdani. I'm just mindful of our time. I know we have a few more questions, but we are already over 3 minutes over time. Please feel free to email me any questions you might have, and I'll be happy to connect you with Dr. Mamdani or forward the questions to him. Thank you again, Dr. Mamdani. It was a real pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thanks to our attendees for joining us this evening. Before we end the session, I'd like to acknowledge the generous support from the Government of Canada for funding the Innovate Network through their Strategic Innovation Fund program. Final reminder, please note that next week we don't have a lecture. Our next lecture is taking place on Thursday, May 6th. At 5 p.m. Eastern. Our next guest speaker will be Steve Leonard, a registered patent agent and a medical device professional and an entrepreneur, and a very interesting talk on AI and intellectual property. One final comment, again, you will be prompted to answer a short survey following this lecture, so please take the time to provide us with your feedback so we can improve these events in the future. Thank you again, and see you next week.